Welcome to another live discussion, which we are streaming to LinkedIn, to YouTube, and we'll make this available as a podcast episode. Today's topic is recommendation engines, and recommendation engines really have become hugely important and powerful tools for companies today. The way Netflix, Amazon, or Facebook use them influence us daily. So in this session, we will explore how companies can best use that technology, but also how recommendation engines have transformed developments in consumer cultures and have changed our relationship with choice. To discuss this, I am very pleased to say I'm joined today by Michael Schrage, who is an author, an innovation expert, and a research fellow at the MIT Sloan School of Management. It's really great to have you with us today, Michael. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure and an honor, and I very much look forward to our conversation.
Yes,
Writing a book on recommendation engines was one of the most educational experiences I've ever had. So I very much enjoyed it, and the chance to talk about it is terrific.
And I'm really looking forward to it. And thank you very much. I've had the pleasure to read your book in advance of it, in advance of your publication, which I very much appreciated, and I really liked it. And I learned a lot about recommendation engines, and I'm really looking forward to exploring this in a bit more detail. This discussion, as all of my live discussions, are for the people that are watching. So you see the banner at the bottom, people sharing with us where they're coming from. So I'm just looking through. We've got people joining us from Dallas in Texas, from Brazil, from Jacksonville in Florida, from Atlanta, from Spain, from India, from Colombia. Is wonderful to see from Cape Town and from Egypt, from all over the world, which is wonderful. What I would like, we're talking about recommendation engines. So what I thought would be a nice way to do is to engage anyone listening to us today and say, okay, maybe put into the comments any recommendation engines that you use that you think work well. So if you say, actually, it is Spotify, it's Netflix, it's TikTok, can you think of any that you enjoy? And also share with us any questions you have. So if you have any questions for Michael, any questions around recommendation engines, we will try to answer as many of these as we can. I will keep a watchful eye on the comments while we are going through the questions. So, Michael, as we said, you've just published a new book called Recommendation Engines, and I have a copy of your book here. Which
be still my heart. Thank you very much. It looks lovely next to you. Yes.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed reading it. So maybe you could give us a brief overview of what you do at MIT and what motivated you to write that book.
Yes. I'm delighted to do so. So I've been affiliated with MIT, both the Media Lab and now the Initiative on the Digital Economy at the Sloan School for over 20 years. And as you rightly introduced me, my initial focus was on innovation. And I was very interested in how could people collaborate to create more interesting innovation. And I've sort of flipped. I've now become more interested in how innovations create more collaborative people. I'm much more interested in the human capital issues. So my research has focused on the rise and design of network effects. I've done a lot of work on collaboration. I've done work on metrics, and I've done work on design of experiment. And if you look at the intersection of all of those disciplines, what does it best? What is the best instantiation of that? It's recommendation engines. And at the same time, you have the rise of machine learning. So it's not just how do we make better recommendations, it's how do these recommendation engines actually learn? How do we do experimentation around that? How do we get people to collaborate more with the machines and systems giving them advice, offering them choice, increasing optionality for people. So the one twist, and this has become a topic of great interest, and it was the last chapter of the book, which is this is a lot about who do we want to become, the future of the self. The recommendations that we follow, the advice that we follow, influences who we become. If we turn that into software, forgive me for doing this, maybe that's selvsware. How I would look at recommendation engines as the first generation of selvsware designed to amplify and augment agency and choice. And that's why things like Spotify and TikTok and Amazon are so interesting, because they transform the choices that we have and how we exercise those choices. That's the core of my research.
Wonderful. Very good. Can you share with us anything that people might not find on your LinkedIn profile? Maybe something more personal?
Well, as we briefly discussed before, my LinkedIn profile has me at Imperial College, but in fact, I hold an appointment at Imperial College, but I spend most of my time on the East Coast. I'm now on the West Coast with my wife's family for the most obvious of reasons. I think that the thing that you don't find that I really am more enthusiastic about, and this conversation with you will push me to do, is my selvsware research. I believe that the future of the self, the future of agency in a digital world, in a global digital world, is transformative and important. And indeed, it really was. It sharpened my thinking. It sharpened my awareness. It exposed me to a whole new community of people designing technology to improve choice. There are downsides, there are risks to that, but I came away pretty energized. So that's maybe one of the ways I'll update and upgrade my LinkedIn profile.
Good. So let's talk about recommendation engines, and maybe a good start would be to explore the best examples. What are, in your research, writing the book, which ones would you highlight as doing this really well? Which recommendation engines work, and which ones are maybe some of the more innovative ways companies use them?
That is an important question, Bernard, but it is also a trick question. You do, of course, know the Latin phrase cui bono, who benefits, for whom. I could make a case that one of the, and indeed, both the Chinese and the Americans would make a case that TikTok has one of the most successful recommendation engines in terms of level of time spent, user-generated content delivered, virality, transmission, amount of time and engagement, etc. So what is it that we're seeking to optimize here? Are we seeking, in the case of an Amazon, to optimize sales? Are we seeking, in the case of Netflix, to optimize bingeability? Are we seeking to optimize, in the nicer cases of Facebook and Instagram, engagement with one's friends or one's feed? So this ties into work that you have done pioneering research in, which is, of course, what are the KPIs? What are the metrics? This is the key thing that you need to understand about recommendation engines in a machine learning era. They can be optimized to whatever individual North Star KPI you have, or balanced or unbalanced portfolio of KPIs you have. I have one serious example in the book about how YouTube transformed itself, because what was the original KPI they thought they wanted to promote? Engagement. How did they want to measure engagement? Altogether now, CTR, click-through rate. And so what did YouTube discover? What did Google and YouTube discover 2-3 years into it? The bulk of videos used and clicked were clickbait. People really weren't happy with it, but everybody was clicking. So the advertisers were happy because the advertisers used what? Click-through rate. So they overhauled it. They used machine learning, and their new metric, it's not that click-through wasn't important. Their new metric was dwell time. How much time did people spend? Because time was a better proxy than click-through. Now, needless to say, there are certain balancing aspects. Click-through time, do people share it? Do they comment on it? Do they link it to something else? Wow, that's what the future of machine learning and self-expression and content and recommendation are going to look like. That sort of integration, that sort of interoperability. And that's why it's such a fascinating area. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but
no, that's great.
That's a trick question.
You talked about lots of great examples. TikTok, obviously, one of them, and it's interesting how the whole battle for TikTok at the moment in the US, where obviously the president wants TikTok to be sold, or at least the American operations. And what I found interesting is that TikTok's entire business model is recommendation engines. Is
exactly right.
Is they you don't even set any parameters in the beginning. They simply watch what you're watching and what you're clicking on, and they give you more of that. And what is interesting is that China has just updated their rules, their export restrictions, where they now include personalized information push technology based on data analysis and artificial intelligence interactive interfaces. So that is very interesting.
Yes, but
they're obviously doing a very good job doing that.
Yes, but Bernard, let's be very clear here. Kai-Fu Lee from Google did this book about the AI rivalry between the US and China.
Absolutely.
China, to be polite about it, clearly has a different regulatory and oversight regime on privacy and issues than the West. But I want to make an important business point about TikTok. Less than 5-6 years ago, everybody was talking about the bat companies in China. Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, WeChat, the Super App, all of which, by the way, each of which were recommendation driven, that all of them. So here out of nowhere comes ByteDance, Beijing ByteDance, breaking this oligopoly and becoming a higher profile global competitor around recommendation than the bat companies. I mean, that's bloody remarkable. That's not a small niche, that's global. And so in the same way you've described and other organizations have been described as born digital, these organizations were born recommending. Their success is contingent on the quality and quantity and specificity and novelty and serendipity of the recommendations they make. And I think those issues are going to become more important over time. By the way, just as important in B2B as B2C. So I don't want to, as much as I like dancing hip videos of, monkeys and teenagers, the reality is these same recommendation principles, these same machine learning algorithms are going to be as important for the future of Internet 4.0 and IoT as for pop culture.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I'm just having a look through the stream here to see who has joined us. Let me just pull in a few. We've got Diana from Colombia. We have Rochelle from Virginia. We have Robert from Tanzania and East Africa.
Wow.
We have someone from India. We have Marco from Italy. So it's nice to see that we are all real people. We've got Riza from the Philippines, and we have SK from Singapore, someone from Barcelona, Malaysia, and even Samia from Australia.
Wow, I am impressed. I am now you're making me self-conscious. That's we're doing a global performance here.
No, it's wonderful. So we talked about some good examples of recommendation engines. Have you got some examples where you say, okay, maybe they are dangerous examples where companies didn't get it right, not so good examples?
Well, I want to be careful how I answer. That's not a trick question. One of the great things about let me step back. One thing that I believe, and again, it's one of the things I admire about your work, is that it's important to revisit the fundamentals, to take the fundamentals seriously. And what I'm about to say may sound like a bit of a joke, but I could not be more serious. They're called recommendation engines, not compliance engines. The purpose of a recommendation engine is to give you better choices and for you to believe that you're getting better choices. If you feel that you're being manipulated or maneuvered or conned or trapped, that's not much of a recommendation, is it? So there's a natural market mechanism associated with a recommendation engine, which is if Amazon presents me with options and I don't explore those options further, odds are they're crappy recommendations. If Spotify adds songs to my playlist that I skip over immediately, those are not good recommendations. So in terms of quality control, there is a natural feedback loop here. The real challenge, and this is addressed in the book, but also addressed by everybody concerned with altogether now ethical AI issues, is what happens when, to quote people from in China, JD or LinkedIn, what happens when your recommendation engine knows you better than you know yourself? Do you trust your friends? Do you trust your recommendation engine to make recommendations that are in your best interest or their best interest? We're back to the Google question, cui bono. Mm-hmm. So the better recommendation engines get, the more intimate knowledge they have. And let's be blunt here, with big data and everything, they're learning more and more with more and more and indeed better data. Back to the ByteDance issue, it's not an accident. They're not trying to kill off music videos. It's the data issue associated with here. What guidelines are there? And so about manipulating and exploiting people. And so the same sort of issues that we are discussing about transparency and interpretability of machine learning, again, issues that you've explicitly written about, need to be mapped onto recommender systems, to recommendation engines. If Jeff Bezos asked me for advice, trust me, that's not going to happen. I would say one of the things that I think would be good for Amazon and good for Amazon's customers would be if you could click a button and see why Amazon said people like you, or why this book, why these materials. So to clarify which aspects of Amazon are being promoted because it's an Amazon relationship with a supplier, or because really that's how, when we look at your persona, when we look at your digital self, when we've examined your behavior as you browse through the mobile and laptop site, this is why we're making these recommendations for you. So the ethics of these things are very, very interesting. I'll go on for 10 more seconds of this. I'm idealistic. I prefer to believe that mutual interest, here's a metric you love and you've written on, customer lifetime value. If you take customer lifetime value seriously as a metric, you're going to make recommendations that will build customer lifetime value. Mm-hmm. But if your metric is closing the sale per session or optimizing a per session transaction, I don't think that incents the kind of relationship that's going to work. I think it creates ethical challenges. And so ironically and appropriately, the whole issue around metrics, the whole issue of what we want to optimize around, who you want your customer to become, how do you want your recommendations to transform your customer and client? My God, what question could be more strategic? What question could be more profound? That's why I love this topic. That's why I appreciate this opportunity.
Great. No, I couldn't agree more, obviously. So let's take a step back and explore what really are recommendation engines. How powerful are they? How persuasive are they? How pervasive are they? And why do they really matter today? So maybe you can give us a a 2-minute overview?
There are tremendous technical details. You really do. If you're taking the thing that happened as I was writing the book that shocked me and made my life less fun was that as I was writing the book, machine learning was sweeping through recommender systems, recommendation engines. The revolution was going on as I was writing the book. That's not to say that we didn't know it was coming, but the speed, the intensity, the idea that Amazon and Google and SAP were basically, and Microsoft were offering these AI ML platforms to do these things, to do machine learning at scale. Well, this led to all manner of replatforming and exploration, et cetera. So the key thing is it went away from how do we make a good recommendation to how do we learn to recommend? How do we learn over time? So the center of gravity shifted. That said, the best, simplest description I've heard for recommendation engines that I elaborate on and want to share with participants here is recommender systems, recommendation engines are similarity hunters. They look for relevant similarities. They look for similarities between users of things that leads to collaborative filtering, or they lead to similarities in features so that you get very different kinds of cars and variations of a theme on that. So what are the relevant similarities? But you don't want all kinds of, there's a difference between different flavors of vanilla and different flavors of ice cream. So what are the categories? How do you tag the data in this way? When should a similarity suggest a complementarity? Do you just want to recommend knives, or should you also recommend forks at a certain point and spoon? So what are the relevant similarities? So similarity, diversity, discovery, serendipity. To what extent are you going to look at the foibles and profile of the user versus the context? So here's a nice simple example for a recommender. You want a recommendation for a restaurant, but if you've got a mobile device and that mobile device can detect where you are and what time of day it is, a smart recommender is going to make recommendations for, you want a dinner reservation versus a lunch reservation. You want something that will take only 15 minutes to get to rather than an hour to get to. I know this sounds like sort of complicating these things, but why am I giving you these different use cases and scenarios? Because the quality of the recommendation, the quality of the similarity hunting is going to be a function, not just of the algorithms that look for similarity, but from the diversity and reliability of the data sources and their context. So if you are shopping on Amazon, you are shopping on Amazon. But if you are driving or commuting on Waze and you decide you want to look for something, that makes a difference to the recommender. Is the recommender smart enough to pick up on these things? If not, should you make the recommender smarter on this? I'll give you one last example in this regard because I want to give a B2B example. We're talking about Internet of Things, industrial internet. It's very, very important that something breaks, we have the right part to replace it. So I have a recommender. What is the best part to replace it? But suppose that I have predictive analytics. Suppose that I know the part is likely to break in the next 3 or 4 days. I may not just want a recommendation of the part. I may want a recommender of the warehouse, who should be replacing it, what the shutdown. So all of a sudden, that's changing. Predictive analytics changes the context of the ultimate widget may be the same, but the entire context of the recommendation may be transformed by that. Now, let me tell you what shocks me. I'm going to go on one thing, and this is one of the most important insights I came away with the book. I think the original sin of predictive and normative analytics is that people want the right answer. Give me the solution to my problem. Solve my problem. That's not what recommenders do. Recommenders give you the best choices to solve your problem. So we have it's different from what are we optimizing here? Are we optimizing the solution, or are we optimizing the appropriate portfolio or array of choices? And that is why I'm so fascinated. So to go back to how do recommenders work? They look for similarities in choices, but enough variance there that you become really intrigued and appreciate the breadth, variety, and diversity. And sometimes that breadth, variety, and diversity becomes serendipity. You see something that you never would have thought of, and you're happy, you're empowered. Great recommendation engines empower you, not just inform you. They inspire you. They don't just give you better information.
I love that. Very good point. I love the fact, and I think this is exactly what you want in modern recommendation engines. You want them to inspire you and empower you, and not to confine you and restrict you, which it sometimes feels like.
Yes. And I will give you one real world example in this regard where there's an enormous tension. Medicine. As everybody listening to this call, to this talk understands, there's evidence-based medicine. What should the doctor do? What is the best course of treatment? But guess what? Not everybody is the same. Some people weigh a little more. Some people have different kinds of histories. So what is personalized medicine? Personalized medicine, if I'm the doctor, I probably don't want to be told by the algorithm, this is the way to treat that patient. I want to be able to see what my options are. What are the recommendations in this regard? For a couple of reasons. One is, and this ties into a theme we may discuss, choice architectures. I want to be able to explain to my patient, here are the options. Here's why I think this one makes the most sense for us, as opposed to, well, this is what the machine says we're going to do. And I know that you are a little concerned about an operation as opposed to a non-invasive approach for a few weeks first, but this is what we're told to do. So the whole notion of choice architecture, how do we present choices in a way that meaningfully influence a dialogue, or as I mentioned earlier, a collaboration? That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And the people doing work in recommendation engines are pioneering the future of choice architectures and are being informed by important insights in how people react and respond to choice, individually and collectively.
Absolutely. Let me just pull in a quick question here, because I think it's very relevant. Asra is saying, what if retailers or e-commerce companies really want to focus on revenue generation? And I guess this is what companies...
So how can I push, of course. But here's my pushback. Suppose you pushed for revenue generation, but you lost money on the items that you sold. Maybe what you really want is revenue with a certain level of margin. Okay, so tell me why you're focusing on revenue generation at the expense of margin. What ratio is appropriate for you? How about this? What about return? Would you like the person to buy? Would you like the person to come back? Are you prepared? We're back to customer lifetime value here. Are you prepared to revenue generation over a 1-year period or over a quarterly period? Again, I don't mean to sound sycophantic, Bernard, but this is exactly the kind of stuff that you've been writing on, which is what metrics, what KPIs are fit for purpose. I assure you, I can look every single one of the people on this webinar, this talk, this conversation in the eye and say, I promise you that Jeff Bezos of Amazon or Jack Ma of Alibaba did not deploy recommendation engines with the intent of maximizing revenue. That was not
And both of those, Amazon in particular for me is a great example because their metrics are very balanced. So they look at revenue, but they also look at profit margins. But most importantly, they look at customer lifetime value. They look at share of basket, and all of those at the moment are going in the right direction. And they in Amazon's case, especially during the pandemic, their market share has increased so rapidly that they actually scaled back their recommendation engines and they stopped them from recommending anymore because they said, actually, we need to get our fulfillment centers in shape first in order to deliver a great customer experience.
But see what you've done there. And that's a perfect example because at sometimes you need to throttle back the recommendation because you don't want to recommend things that are stocked out or that because there have been stock outs, it wouldn't be a good recommendation. This is why, yes, we want to increase revenue. Yes, we want to increase profitability. But why don't you use recommendation engines that learn as a way to think out loud, to use your phrase, what your balanced scorecard of metrics should be? Recommendation engines are a way of what? Creating customer engagement, promotion, increasing the market basket, getting people to try things that they didn't try before, getting people to explore things. You want to treat the recommendation engine not just as a sales tool or tactic, but as a platform for discovery. I'm sputtering here because if you look at successful recommendation engines in the real world, that's what they do. If you'll forgive me, I'll go one step further. One of the things that people need to appreciate and understand about I blur between recommender systems and recommendation engines, is they're not just a way of selling, they're production methodologies. Here's an example. Netflix looks at what people watch and what they binge, and they reverse engineer that to cast shows to identify the kind of genre that people are most likely to binge. One of their first shows in that regard was House of Cards and Orange is the New Black. This isn't just creative people coming up with a great show concept. It's creative people coming up with a great show concept informed by lots and lots and lots of data. Stitch Fix does this with clothing. Spotify has made clear that it is now working with composers and musical groups to help produce music. So it's not just how do we better consume, it's how do we better design, craft, produce, generate, innovate. So you get two things. You have the potential for the two things for the price of one. So I'll just give a little pushback to the gentleman who asked that question about growing revenue. Maybe one of the things a retailer will discover is this is where I should have my own store product. Because this is one way that I see that my customers really like this kind of food. We should have a store brand of this because that would be one way to generate revenue and, by the way, get greater margin. So let's not ignore the insights for creation as well as the insights for consumption. Recommendation engines give you both. They can give you both. Another reason why I like them.
Very good. One of the chapters in your book that I liked was that you made the point that recommendation engines are not new. We've always relied on recommendations of some sort, and this has then evolved into various different types of recommender systems and recommendation engines. Would you be able to give us maybe a 2-minute overview of some of the key milestones and a little history of how recommendation engines have evolved?
Well, that is I said before that there was a trick question. This is a teasing question because there are two ways I'm going to answer that. One of the things that was most fun about writing this book was that I got to look at the history of recommendation and advice. And that got me reading stuff that I never thought I'd be reading, like the Oracle of Delphi. And by the way, what's on the pillars of the Oracle of Delphi? Know thyself. Future self, astrology, the I Ching, and the hexagrams that are used to predict your future, to give you advice on how you respond to various things. So, by the way, that was one of the chapters that my academic reviewers wanted to cut out. And I said, no, I had fallen in love with that. But more relevantly for the people on this call, what you really had was the rise of digital recommendation engines. People look for advice regardless of the medium. And so the real breakthroughs began to occur in the 1990s. And I was at one of the places where that was going on, MIT. Paul Resnick's group, Patty Maze's group did Firefly. There were Group Lens. And the other thing was going on at Xerox PARC. Many of you have heard of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, which pioneered the laser printer and graphical user interfaces. And it was the place where Steve Jobs figuratively, literally ripped off the idea for the Macintosh computer. Fantastic place. And one of the preliminary recommenders they developed was something called Tapestry. Why? Because there were all of these really, really smart people publishing all this really, really interesting thing, but who had the time to read all of what was being published in this community? So David Goldberg in the early 90s got together with a couple of people, and they began doing tagging and curating and rating the various papers and memos that were published to make them more searchable. But then they realized we don't just want to have search, we want to have things that are customized, that reflect your interests. And so search evolved into recommendation. Things were tagged differently. Researchers like you have read this kind of paper or memo. And Tapestry became the template for things that Lotus was doing with Lotus Notes and what Group Lens at MIT was doing for groups. Oh, and then we decided to extend it, not just academic research papers. Why not Movie Lens? That's for movie recommendations, similarities between movies. It was done for music. And there was also a program called Homer for music. I forget what the H stands for, but it's music recommendations. That was a doctoral thesis. So the whole notion of here, as the number of choices arose, as volumes of data increased, you have a choice. You improve search, Google, or you improve recommendation. But here's what everybody at Google knows. The more you personalize search, the more like a recommendation it becomes. So in many, if not most respects, search and recommendation are on convergent paths. Now, there are different underlying teleologies and purposes there, but that's really a destiny that we need to take seriously. And as I mentioned from the YouTube example before, the original YouTube was about searching for videos. Now it's about recommending videos. And now I'll be a bit of a jerk and say that I bet many people at YouTube look at TikTok and say, maybe we should have taken recommendation a little more seriously in the algorithms we've designed.
Very good. So how do recommendation engines really work today? And what are some of the ingredients that make really great recommendation engines today?
Well, I'll go back to a history answer on this. One of the things that really transformed people's interest, focus, and investment in recommendation engines was the $1 Million Netflix Prize in 2006. And, Netflix has done very, very well in that regard. And that was more of a classic they were trying to deal with the long tail of choices because everybody wanted the hits. What kind of recommendations could we come up with that would move some of the long tail, some of the niche and specialty films? And what you really recognized is to make recommendation work, and now we're back to the ethical question, we need to discover more about people's preferences. We need to understand our customers better. That's how you personalize these things. So what are the features? Do we care about people's age, their gender, their families, their credit score? So all of the ethical and privacy issues, GDPR, these are then back to TikTok, these become much, much more important. And that's why, just to make a small digression, that's why I think, given the current regulatory and global environment, business recommendation engines are undervalued relative to pop culture engines, because some privacy issues are not going to merge. It's more going to be about recommenders in the context of use cases as opposed to virality and advertising, etc. So in machine learning, what are we looking for? We're looking for features. What are the aspects and elements of the item or the user that are most relevant? We've talked about personal profiles. If you're Spotify, what are the things they look at now? Is they look at the sonographs. They actually look at the sound patterns and use convolutional neural nets and recurrent neural nets to identify the features in spectrographs for certain genres of music. And if you happen to be interested in country music or pop music or certain aspects, rhythms, cadences, tempos of pop music, that may be put in your Discover Weekly domain. What's so interesting here, and I'm going to relate this back to one of the key findings of that Netflix competition. There was the belief in the Netflix competition, almost 25 years ago. There was this belief that we could optimize an algorithm. Let's dramatically improve the Cinematch algorithm. Instead, what did the winners do? The winners created algorithmic ensembles. It was a portfolio of algorithms that were weighted in different ways to measurably improve the quality of recommendations. And that's what we have with diverse data sets. Let's take music. We have the artist, we have reviews, we have the people who like this kind of music, we have the spectrographs, we have, did people like this song before this kind of music or after this kind of music? We have a combinatorial explosion, what's called the curse of dimensionality. We have multiple ways of analyzing these sorts of things. And we have different algorithms that can process it. So this, I think, is the real challenge going forward, which is what kind of algorithmic ensembles really personalize and customize the items that we want people to explore. More accurately, the lists of items, the portfolios of items we want people to explore. And so, just to be slightly technical, there's the whole notion of learn to rank in recommendation engines. That is, instead of recommending individual objects, they recommend lists of objects. Mm-hmm. What's the proof of this? Spotify doesn't examine just individual songs for Discover Weekly. They look at people's playlists. The unit of analysis is the portfolio, the playlist. That's different than just analyzing the song. A playlist is not just the sum of songs. It's an integral. Forgive me, it's an integral versus a sigma kind of. And that's the kind of way I'd like people to be looking at this, which is what kind of choices, not what's the best choice, as important as that is, how do we want to think of presenting meaningful choices to people? The more we know about people, how does the perception and reality of meaningful choice change?
Great. And I completely agree. So we need to be clear what we want to understand and what we want to optimize. We then need the data. We need the technology and the algorithms to turn this data into the right recommendations. The other ingredient I would probably throw into this group of enablers that you need is actually trust, because the only way to get any human being to share data with you is that they trust you. And I think this will become so much more important in the future, where we really think, okay, each scroll and each time I stop and watch a video on TikTok, this will be recorded. Do I trust TikTok as a company or not? Or do I trust Apple or Microsoft or Google? And I think those companies that develop the trust will be the ones that will be able to develop the best recommendation engines.
I could not agree with you more. I mentioned that in the book, and I'm ashamed of myself that I did not proactively mention that. And in honor of the platform hosting us, this is the big deal for LinkedIn. Because one of the ways, if I am running LinkedIn, if I am running Microsoft, one of my KPIs for LinkedIn is, do you trust the people on LinkedIn and exchanging ideas and collaborating with them or proposing projects with them? That's a very, very big deal. So I could not agree with you more. And metrics around trust or identifying trust behaviors is a big deal. Sorry, we have a lot of sirens here. I'm in California. As you know, the state is on fire. So there certain background noises tend to materialize.
Very good.
But there's no smoke thus far.
Yeah, good. Let me know if you get too warm.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
So one of the points you make in your book is that recommendation engines have completely changed our relationship with choice. Can you expand on this?
Yes.
I guess one of the things we talk about is these filter bubbles, where users surround themselves with content that serves to just reinforce their own biases. Do you want to? What's your response to that?
This ties into your earlier question about some of the downsides of recommendation engines. And you mentioned Eli Pariser's book, The Filter Bubble. And recommendation engines can indeed be about confirmation bias. That would be a bad thing. And this is a serious issue you have. If you're a musician, if you're Spotify or LinkedIn, do you just want to give people more of what they want? And make them feel more and more comfortable, or, in algorithmic terms, explore versus exploit. How do you encourage people to go to the edges, go to their boundaries? Some people don't want, let's be very blunt, some people just want confirmation, affirmation, validation. And you're going to, we'll go back to the gentleman who asked the question about maximizing revenues. You're going to sell to people who want affirmation. You're going to tell them they have excellent taste no matter what they buy. You're going to be very, very careful about presenting something that may challenge their version of themselves. But I'm going to say that most people look to be surprised. Human beings like to be surprised. We prefer to be surprised pleasantly, but a recommendation engine can put in that Spotify playlist a song where you go, do I like this? That's the difference between saying, I don't like this, or this is different. Do I like this? It evokes curiosity. Talk about feature analysis. So I mentioned the phrase choice architecture earlier. Many, if not most of the people listening in or watching this have heard of nudges. The whole notion of how do you design choices to nudge people to do something that they really should be doing. By the way, the book is called Nudge, not Shove, or Do It or Else, So that ties into the notion of choice architecture. How do we frame choices? How do we present choices in ways that constructively influence people's behaviors? That is a big, big question. And nobody's in a better position to do that than the Alibabas and the TikToks and the Amazons and the Spotifys. So yes, I'm very concerned about these issues. And that's why I believe the notion of the future self. I wrote a book on this topic. I'll float it out here for you. Who do you want your customers to become? Who do you want your best customers to become? Who do you want your typical customers to become? I'm going to quote Bernard Marr here and say that you probably want your best customers and your typical customers to trust you more. What kind of recommendations can you make? What kind of advice can you offer? What kind of returns policy can you facilitate that make it easier for your customers and clients to trust you more? How do we build recommender systems that build trust as well as better advice? I actually completely agree with Ron. You could have a recommendation engine that delivered excellent recommendations, but you know what? You don't trust the vendor. You don't trust the provider of that. So how do you use recommendation not just to deliver better choices, but to build better trust? I guarantee you that these are the kinds of serious issues that chief marketing officers, compliance people, and genuinely visionary entrepreneurs are debating. I guarantee you, because I've done work with Amazon, that Amazon takes this trust issue very, very seriously. And just to echo the example Bernard raised earlier with, Amazon's behavior during the crisis, you don't want to make recommendations that create problem for your fulfillment center so you don't deliver on time. Mm-hmm. If you're a prime customer and they're always delivering a day or two late, so much for trust, so much for the promised customer experience. These are not subtle issues. These are very, very profound issues. And recommendation engines transform our potential and the possibilities for addressing those fundamental issues.
Absolutely. And I think you make a great point that actually they do impact choice if they're not implemented properly. And
exactly.
If companies actually take their social responsibility seriously, and they can very simply put a recommendation engine in place that simply uses machine learning to recommend anything to sell more stuff. That's easy. But actually, like you said, if Spotify sees this as a danger, and actually they want you to have the widest range of music available, they might understand the lyrics, the beats per minute, all the things that you normally like. But if they then throw in random recommendations and see how things go, that I think this is the sign of a good recommendation engine.
Yes, although I would push back on the random aspect on this. Here, if I'm Spotify, here's one of the things I want to do to expose people to new music. Okay? I begin to make celebrity playlists more accessible. It turns out you admire this kind of actor or this kind of entrepreneur. Richard Branson launched Virgin. You know what? I think I would like to listen to Richard Branson's playlist. I'm bound to discover songs that I haven't heard on Richard Branson's playlist. So there are many ways of, and now what does Spotify know? That you're looking for inspiration in music from people like Richard Branson or Jack Ma or Elon Musk. I mean, by the way, I have no relation or Katrina Lake from Stitcher. I have no knowledge of this. I don't know whether they would do this, whether it was a violation of privacy, but you get the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are multiple ways of exposing people to new things. There are multiple vectors. And honestly, that would be I'll ask you, Bernard, would you put your playlist on Spotify? Your playlist that inspires you for thinking, your inspirational, your thinking playlist, would you put that on Spotify?
Yeah, I would.
I would bet you'd get more people listening to yours than listening to mine on this. But wouldn't you be fascinated to know who would be? Yeah,
that would be very.
So you have people following you. You have people following your insights on LinkedIn. Why not have them follow some of your aesthetic tastes on a Spotify? Maybe we can improvise $100 million or $1 billion industry during this session.
Maybe.
By the way, being serious, I just wanted to say one quasi-critical thing about LinkedIn. I thought years ago when LinkedIn bought SlideShare that it was a brilliant thing to do because you could see people's presentations. Now, of course, it's been sold to Schrage. But my view, biting the hand that feeds me here, my view is a better recommendation engine could have led to, I mean, I would have liked if I had looked at certain presentations and people would recommend that you link up with someone because you like these presentations. I think that was a natural, to my mind, that was a natural alignment between LinkedIn content. And so it's not unlike the Spotify thing. There are a lot of ways we can go if we're ingenious on this.
And I have to say, SlideShare has worked fantastically well for me. So I turn many of my articles into SlideShares, and they do very well. So people are still looking out for those.
Exactly. And again, we see the cross. This is the antithesis of a filter bubble, though.
Mm-hmm.
You get to see different media, cross-media, cross-platform recommendations. Yes, we need to protect privacy. Yes, we need to allow people to control their information. But the flip side is you get exposed to insights and communities that you otherwise would not. That's not search. That's recommendation.
Very true. So what are your future predictions about recommendation engines and how this technology will evolve over the coming years?
I am going to offer a two-sided, I'm going to offer three things, okay? First is, I believe we're going to get more recommendations, not just about how we consume or enjoy movies. We're going to see recommendations for how we should be spending our time. Mm-hmm. How do you want to be? Do you want to become more productive? Do you want to enjoy your life more? There will be more recommendations engines designed to amplify or augment aspects of your life that you care more about.
Yeah.
That's one. Number two, we're going to have meta recommendation engines. That is to say, I've got Spotify, I've got all these recommendations. I want a recommender that gives me insight in how to orchestrate this ensemble of recommenders. Recommend how I manage my recommenders. Is there a bit of too much of am I spending too much time here, et cetera, et cetera? Why am I being more influenced by Netflix than by Spotify, than by Amazon, than by TikTok, than by LinkedIn? And the third is, I believe there needs to be, as I mentioned earlier, greater transparency and interpretability of recommendation engines. I look at AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented introspection. I want to know why Spotify is playing these songs for me. I want to know why I seem obsessed with this genre on Netflix versus that. I want these recommendation engines. Okay, maybe my true narcissism or a self-obsession or neuroticism is coming in. I want better insight into myself. Okay? I want to understand myself better. I take Socrates seriously. Know thyself. I want to know myself better because I believe I can be better and do better if I know myself better. And these recommendation engines, they've got a lot of data. I can learn from them. I want to learn.
Great future predictions. So we've got a minute and a half left. So what would you say are your key takeaways? What do you want people to take away about recommendation engines, and what are the key messages you're trying to bring across in your book?
So I'll conclude with 3 points, but I think we did a wonderful job of covering these things, particularly the whole notion of metrics, balance. What are we really trying to do? I want people to come away with 3 key insights. Recommendation engines are prediction technologies. They predict what you like. They predict what you don't like. Okay? They're about what do you want your recommenders to predict? What kind of customer or client user experience do you want your recommenders to predict? It's not the best choice, it's the best choices. The second is that recommenders are a discovery process. They're not there to remind you, they're there for you to discover more value from better choice. What kind of discoveries do you want to make? What kind of discovery do you want to enable for your best customers and clients and your most typical customers and clients? And the third is recommenders are a production methodology. If you've got lots and lots of insight into lots and lots of customers, you can re-engineer your products, your services, your customer experiences for that. You can do what Netflix did. You can re-engineer content. You can re-engineer products. You can re-engineer services that better meet what people like. So those are the three key things. So it's not just about the future of advice. It's the future of discovery, the future of prediction, and the future of production and creativity. That's why I did the book.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael.
Bernard, thank you.
I found this a really fascinating conversation. Michael's book, Recommendation Engines, is out this week at MIT Press. Anyone who wants to explore this topic in a bit more detail, I would very much recommend that book.
Pun intended.
Anyone who wants to listen to this conversation again, head to my YouTube channel, or if you want to listen to this on my podcast, you can do this. This will be available this week, and you can listen to all my previous conversations and my future conversations on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on my podcast. Thank you very much, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you very soon.